You're listening to the expository preaching ministry of Kootenai Community Church, located in Kootenai, Idaho. We pray that Christ is exalted and your spirit is blessed by the teaching of God's Word. For more information about Kootenai Church, please visit us online at kootenaichurch.org.
All right, this question and answer is usually a little bit more designed to get to know the speaker on a personal level. I have a few of those kind of questions, but also I have a whole bunch of questions about space issues that I don't think that he's going to cover for the rest of the weekend, and he kind of touched on some of them that I want to get a bit more detail on tonight. So first, let's begin with this, Jeff. How and when did the Lord save you? Give us your salvation testimony.
Both Anna Marie and I were saved about age 30 or so, and we had been married for 7 years, and like often happens in marriages, not based on the Lord, we had been drifting, and we got to a point of crisis in our marriage, and where there wasn't a lot of hope for us, and it was the circumstances at the time. I was just finishing up graduate school in California, and we were being moved by the Army to Houston, to NASA, for the first assignment at NASA. So October of '87. And although objectively I thought, okay, Anna Marie doesn't even have reason to go with me to Houston, I at the back of my mind I thought, okay, this is bad enough where she might not move there. She might go back to New York with her parents. We had our two sons at the time. They were 2 and 5. But she did move with me, and we moved to Houston. But what made the circumstances even more challenging was we had gone down for a house hunting trip. We closed on the house in Houston, and I moved the family in, got the household goods there, moved them in, settled in. And then I immediately went to Alabama, 650 miles away, on an Army assignment for refresher flight training. For a 5-month course. So we were not only had circumstances of crisis, really, but we were geographically separated. So we would talk every evening on the phone. This was in '87, so before cell phones and whatnot. So we were locked in landline and schedules. So we would talk every evening, but the phone calls were just hopeless and miserable. Until one evening, she sounded different. And circumstances hadn't changed. But I said, "You sound different. What's going on?" She said, "I've become born again." I learned later that she had reached out to a church who sent a couple of ladies to minister to her. The counseling pastor had sent a team of ladies, and they witnessed to her, I think, a couple times. And then also in God's providence, He had put believers next door to us in this new house and across the street, and they were an encouragement to her. And she just one evening, the Lord saved her, and she came to faith. You were by yourself at the time. And when we talked the next time, there's something different. Circumstances hadn't changed. I said, "What's going on?" She said, "I've become born again." I said, "What's that?" Explain that to me, and she tried, and I thought, oh no, some church got to her, and they want our money. And this was a couple of years, I think, maybe 2 years after the Jimmy Baker fiasco and all of that. So that was my impression of the larger Christian faith. Now, we were both raised nominally, culturally Christian. Myself in a Scandinavian Lutheran area in northern Wisconsin, Anna Marie in Catholic culture, Italian Catholic in New York State. But that was a cultural kind of thing. So she sent me tracts in the mail after that conversation, and I saw the tracts being, again, going through the Cold War, and I knew what propaganda was, and to me the tracts were propaganda. So I had no confidence in them. But they sent me to the Gideon Bible that was in my apartment, and I went to the Bible where the tract sent me, and I spent starting in October '87. I came home for Thanksgiving, came home for Christmas, but then into January, I asked her to fly down. Her parents came watch the boys fly down to Alabama from Texas, spend the long weekend with me in January, mid-January, which she did. And on that weekend, I asked her to help me pray to commit my life to Christ. So for me, it was. I'm very analytical. I had to study. I spent that several months studying the Gospel of John and the letter to the Romans. Somewhere along the way, I discovered Christian radio, which I didn't have the same suspicions that I had with Christian TV. So I started listening to the radio whenever I could and whatever was on. And at some point, it might have been even after January, after coming to faith, I discovered specifically John MacArthur and Grace to You, and everything else kind of fell by the wayside. So John really taught me the Bible from early 88 all the way through the 90s. Our routine, when I got back to Houston in February of 88, joined the family, we began rebuilding our marriage and family life. And John, Grace to You was on at 9 o'clock every evening in Houston. So it was our routine to have the boys in bed, and I had an open Bible, a notepad, and a pencil, and listening to Grace to You every night for years as schedule allows. And so, in God's grace, we made it. Now we're going on 45 years of marriage. So,
well, yeah. Now you already had a distinguished career in the Army and in aerospace with engineering. Your Bible says you went to the Master's Seminary. When was that?
That was much later. I had an opportunity to, it's not full-time residence. You go there twice a year for a week in January and 2 weeks in July, and then you do a lot of reading, a lot of paper writing from home. So my graduation was in 21, I think. So I guess I started in 2019.
So why did you go to Master's Seminary late in life like that?
I was called to do it. It was an opportunity. Actually, I never dreamed of doing that. Although I'd been working pretty aggressively in ministry my whole time. I was teaching early, teaching regularly, helping as a lay leader in the church in Houston, and by that time I'm asked to come speak at churches. So I was doing a lot of traveling, doing speaking. I had been, as I mentioned earlier, digging into the scripture, trying to address the questions. But John had really taught me a lot of theology. And part of the story was we met the MacArthurs and got introduced to Grace Ministries in about 2000 or 2000, late 2000. And we became friends and did a lot of ministry with them. And I remember we were in Dallas for an event and had breakfast with John, and he was talking about this being the Doctor of Ministry program being revamped. And after he described it, I said, "Wow, sign me up," just kind of almost jokingly. And he just did a thumbs up. And then later I was having a conversation with Phil Johnson, and I said to Phil, "Yeah, John talked about this D-Min program, and I'd really be interested, except I'm not qualified. I don't have the MDiv or the experience as a pastoral experience." And he said, "Oh, I think with all your education, and we know you, I think you'd qualify." I said, "Oh, okay." I didn't say anything more to anybody. I just got online and applied. Never spoke to John about it at all. Just let the application process happen, and then got accepted and entered it. And I had no time to do it like everybody in a D-Min program, but the Lord provides, and we got through it. And yeah, it was a great program.
How old were your kids when you went to space the first time?
I missed our older son's high school graduation because I was in space. He still reminds me about that. So they were 18 and 15.
How is it like being an astronaut and a father? How much of the danger of your job do you share with your kids? They obviously have to know that there's big risk there.
Yeah, they grew to appreciate it on their own. We never highlighted that in family conversations. Even between Anne Marie and I, we never talked about that. It was just inherent. It was known. Obviously you do something like that with a level of confidence, but there's not a sure thing, but you have confidence in the team, confidence in the process to identify risk and mitigate risk. And Anna Marie had that same confidence in the team I worked in. And the NASA thing was not new in one sense because I'd already been in the military flying and doing experimental test flight for years. When we met, I was on the skydiving team at West Point. So for us to have any time to see each other on weekends, she would have to come out to their drop zone and we'd visit between skydives. So she knew right off the bat that it wasn't going to be an easy, risk-free life.
What 5 books, other than Gospel of John, Romans, and all the 64 others in Scripture, what 5 books have you read that have most influenced you?
I mentioned Flavel's Mystery of Providence. I would say Os Guinness's The Call. I've had a lot of study early on calling in life. We all bear offices in life. We're called to the duties and responsibilities and obligations of that office. We're accountable to God to serve in the office. So even the office of husband, the office of father, the office of astronaut, the office of accountant, the office of pick your occupation, if we view it as an office. So Os Guinness had a huge impact on me. MacArthur, of course, the Gospel According to Jesus was very early in one of the early books I read. In fact, it had just come out, I think, about the time we came to faith, if I recall correctly. What else? I mean, I could go through a lot of books of John. John Stott's I want to say The Cross of Christ was very powerful in terms of the atonement.
Okay. What books are you reading now?
Let's see. Actually, I'm working through the biography of President Truman right now.
Okay.
Yeah.
When I was walking through Grace to you a couple years ago, I noticed that there is a display in there of a book that MacArthur has that has been to space. Can you tell us the story behind that?
Oh, well, yeah. As a gift to John, in my last flight, 2016, I worked with Jay Flowers actually, and got the final commentary was the commentary on Mark that was published, and so Jay sent me the commentary, a hard cover of it, and I took all the pages out because you're limited by the mass that you can launch into orbit, so just the cover itself, and I took that along with some other personal items to orbit. And then took pictures of it floating around in the window with the Earth in the background, and came back and actually sent it out there to Jay in advance, and then he had it framed along with the photography and some other things, a certificate, and we presented it to John in the Shepherd's Conference, I think, in 2017.
All right.
Yeah.
Now on to some space questions. You made some audacious claims in the first session. That we actually landed on the moon. Defend that. Just for the record, because I know there are people who deny the moon landing. I told you this yesterday. If I found out tomorrow, if NASA came out tomorrow and said, look, we faked the whole thing, here's why we faked it, here's how we faked it, here's who was involved, it wouldn't ruin my worldview at all. I wouldn't wake up and think, oh, now all my faith in the institutions of America has been destroyed. It would just be another day that ends in Y, where I wake up assuming the government's lying to me, and when they tell me the truth, I'm surprised by that. So it wouldn't shock me at all if we found out tomorrow that it was faked. But
don't worry, you won't even go through the non-shock.
Okay.
Because we did land on the moon. We did it 6 times. I have known several of the moonwalkers. Charlie Duke, by the way, and we're doing an event at the ARC Encounter next month. Charlie Duke, Barry Wilmore, who was one of the 2 that was stranded in space last year, or up until March, and I are doing an event in the middle of June, or July rather. So Charlie walked on the moon with John Young. John Young was a friend. He's passed away now. People love conspiracies, We're just drawn to it. So I get moon landing questions, UFO questions, alien questions, Earth is flat questions, chemtrails. They're all kind of in the same family of conversations. But in regard to the moon landing, I say, okay, we landed on the moon first time in July 1969, the last time in 1972. So it was just a very short time, 6 times. We would have done it 7 times, except Apollo 13 had the problem and just went orbited the moon one time, came back, and the team was able to save the crew. Very heroic. In fact, people ask me about movies all the time. Apollo 13 is the only movie that I think is a very high regard of in terms of space movies. They did a good job in that movie.
Star Trek, not so much. Star Wars?
I watched Star Trek as a kid, the original series. I didn't pay attention since recently. But we did it 6 times. It was in the context of a geopolitical race with our arch rival, the Soviet Union. In the height of the Cold War, we're racing to get to the moon. They had already launched the first man in space, Yuri Gagarin, and we're struggling to get into orbit. And of course, Alan Shepard launched first suborbital, and then John Glenn was the first American to go in orbit. Kennedy made the pronouncement, we're going to land on the moon before the end of the decade. Again, in the context of this geopolitical race against the Soviet Union, Cold War was intense at the time. By the way, there was a race to get to orbit, not so much for space exploration by both sides, but with the arms race. Because if you could develop a rocket, you can deliver an atomic bomb halfway around the world. So that was really the political motivation, at least on the Russian side and perhaps on our side as well, to counter that. But we did it. And our enemies were watching everything we did. We were watching everything they did through the intelligence. Tens of thousands of people were involved. I could argue directly, when you go out to subcontractors that were building, designing, and delivering every component that then was assembled into a spacecraft, a rocket, and a system to do it. Did it the 6 times over and over again. Again, watched by everybody, tens of thousands of people involved, and now 55 or more years have passed by. Do you realize how hard it would be to keep the secret? It's much easier just to have gone and done it.
All right, can you describe the process of conducting a moonwalk? Sorry, not a moonwalk, because you've never been there. So we just have to take your word that actually happens.
Yeah.
Can you, a spacewalk, can you describe the process of a spacewalk?
Yeah, so you're inside a spacecraft, the space station or a space shuttle before that, and you want to go outside. Inside, you're in an atmosphere, basically one atmosphere, so 14.7 psi, just like we're here right now, mix of oxygen and hydrogen. But you're going to go outside. It's a vacuum outside, no air. So when you get into a spacesuit, it's going to be under pressure. The spacesuit is going to be under pressure because you need the oxygen to breathe. You need some kind of atmosphere. But you want to have the minimum pressure of the spacesuit as possible. 14.7 is a really stiff spacesuit. If I can get it down to, say, 4.3 pounds per square inch, it's much easier, much more pliable, but it's still a lot of work to work in the spacesuit. So we do that by going to 100% oxygen and get down to that lower pressure. That's the way the suit is designed. So, we're breathing nitrogen right now, and we have nitrogen in our bloodstream, dissolved in our bloodstream. And for the same reasons that scuba divers can only stay down for length of time they have to come up, or you would get the bends because the nitrogen in your blood would come out of solution, become bubbles, and you can suffer some bad things. Bad things will happen. The same thing is true up there. We're inside the space station. We're breathing nitrogen along with the oxygen. We want to go down to a lower pressure, 100% oxygen. So we get into the suit, put it together, and it's got a lower torso. Think a pair of pants, and it connects to the upper torso, which is around your chest. You kind of climb into it, poke your head through the top, put a helmet on. You connect the lower to the upper torso. Then you put on gloves. Now you're enclosed inside the suit. we'll purge it with 100% oxygen to kind of wash out the nitrogen that's still inside the suit for a period of time. So you're just blowing oxygen out into the atmosphere of the room in the space station. And then you seal it all up. Now you're at 100% oxygen, but you're still at that higher pressure. You what we call pre-breathe to wash out the nitrogen out of our blood, and that can take on the order of a couple hours. I forget the exact time because you're still busy. You're preparing tools and whatnot, but you go through that time frame. Get the tools configured. They're mounted, fixed to the front of the suit. You're working. There's two of you in parallel getting ready. When you get all that done, you're mounted to the wall, and your crewmates take you off the wall, and you're floating. And I know it's hard to visualize or to imagine floating, but you're floating. The suit itself weighs about 300 pounds. You're another 200 pounds, so you're big mass. So you're moving around slow, but fingertip control. And then you come off the mounting on the wall, and they put a backpack on you that is an emergency propulsion system that we would use if we ever separated when we're outside from the space station, became untethered. It's a one-shot deal, kind of to be able to propel you back to the structure of the space station. We never want to use it, but it's a backup system. So now you're all configured. You're floating around inside just inside what we call the airlock, the bigger volume of the airlock. But now you get squeezed into the smaller part of the airlock. A hatch gets closed behind you. So two of you are in there in these big bulky suits, and you're in this small compartment. Hatch gets closed behind you, and now you start letting the air out of that small volume, working toward vacuum. But as you go, you check the suit to make sure there's no leaks in the suit, that everything is working fine. Once you verify that the suits are good, then you go down to a full vacuum, and now you can open up the hatch that goes outside. And you tether yourself before you open the hatch, and it's with a steel braided cable that goes out 80 feet. It kind of reels out. So then you open the hatch and you go outside and hand over hand, and then you go about the work. And the work, there's a variety of tasks that are planned for every spacewalk, highly choreographed. You've studied it in detail. You're outside for 6.5, 7 hours. So it's 6.5 hours of just one task after another. Go to this place, remove this thing, replace it with this. Go to this next location. Maybe you're carrying a big 1,500-pound blivet, whatever it is, replacement battery or whatever it is for that day, and you're putting it in place. So it's if you're watching a spacewalk, and some of you may have, it's like watching grass grow in one sense, because everything happens really slow and everything is hard, and it's hard to see what's going on, what's happening. But that's just the environment you're working in. It takes about 6 hours to get ready to go out the door in that process to get ready, and then you're outside for 6.5, 7 hours. So it's a long day. The hardest thing we do mentally and physically, but the most rewarding thing too, because now you're outside, hanging on the outside of this orbiting space station, which is bigger than a football field, and going around the Earth every 90 minutes, and you're outside for then several orbits.
Yeah.
Incredible. Day, night. You have helmet lights on to be able to illuminate. It's an incredible experience.
Is there a technology that you used on your mission that you wish we had here on Earth, that if it were available to the general public would make our lives better?
Have
you ever been asked that before?
No, usually I get asked a different related question. A technology that we have up there that we don't have here?
Yeah. Is there a technology that NASA has devised for the space station that you think, if that were implemented into everyday life of the average American, that would be cool?
Yeah. No, actually, with the commercialization of technology, the things we have on Earth actually get ahead of us up there in some sense. What we have up there that you don't have here is required in the unique environment of weightlessness. So it doesn't apply here.
Mm-hmm.
but with the explosion of technology, you're ahead here. Commercial available technology is ahead of what we're using up there in that sense,
Yeah.
if it applies in both places.
In your session, you mentioned the relentless pull of gravity. Gravity is not something that we typically spend our days thinking about until we fall down. I went all day today, didn't think about gravity at all, my relationship to it, till we got here and you mentioned being weightless, and then all of a sudden I thought about that. When you get back here, land back here after being up there for 6 months, does it feel like you are just like under the weight of something, like you're under a heavy blanket, or worse than that? What is that?
When you go through the reentry process that I described, you're strapped in that Soyuz, Russian Soyuz, you're in the fetal position on your back, with the gravity, the G forces going down through in that direction. So it's pretty bearable, but it's a massive force. But you're not supporting yourself. You're in the seat, maybe you have your hands here, and you have to labor to breathe, because now you got the weight of the suit pulling on you. You got the gravity of your just on your body. So you labor a little bit more, but you don't really appreciate it until one, you crash land, roll around, end up on the side, maybe hanging on the seat, and then you try to pick up an arm, and it's like something's holding your arm down. Just a simple thing like that. And then you start appreciating gravity. And then you saw the pictures. They open the hatch from the outside, and they'll help us get out, basically pull us out, carry us to a chair, and we're sitting back in a chair, and you feel the spacesuit is not that heavy, that suit, but you feel the weight of it on your chest, and even the weight of your chest itself, lifting it up just to breathe. So you're laboring and breathing. And then the first time you stand up, I was describing that during the break too. The other thing we take for granted is our vestibular system, which gives us our sense of balance. Most of us can stand up and close our eyes and stand straight and not fall down, because our vestibular system is telling our brain which way is up, which way is down, and we can even walk in the dark, and if we do it carefully and not fall down. But in weightlessness, your vestibular system doesn't operate. It's a fluid in your inner ear, and your sensors in your inner ear can tell where the fluid is, and the fluid goes down. It's pulled by gravity. If you're in weightlessness, the fluid just coats the entire inner ear. So your brain just learns to ignore it, turns the signal off, basically. So when you come back to Earth, your brain hasn't picked up that signal yet. So you have no way to maintain your balance, say, in the dark. So not only are you fighting the force of gravity, and then to support your whole body, to stand up, and I mean, it's like you're in the gym under a heavy load doing a body squat. Only it's just your body weight. But in addition to that, you have no sense of balance. So you're fighting. You're using your visual cues just to maintain your balance, and so you'll walk very awkwardly. You support yourself very awkwardly. They're restricted. They don't become public just due to medical privacy. But I participated in an experiment where they videotaped me trying to just do simple maneuvers in the first hour after being back on Earth, and it looked pretty miserable. You look at it, just trying to walk a straight line. Now you recover very quickly. With the first couple hours, you've recovered a lot, but I would say it takes about a week to 10 days to get over what I call even a residual vestibular awareness, where you're not going down the hall and taking the corner and bumping into the wall. Or in one case, I was a little bit overconfident after being back about a week and a half, and we get driven by a driver around to every place we have to go when we get back, and I told the driver after one day back in the U.S., I said, I'll drive myself tomorrow. I feel fine. And that morning I got in my little pickup and got out of the driveway and went to the next corner and drove up over the curb as I took the corner. I thought, whoops, maybe I was premature. So it takes about 10 days to recover from the vestibular awareness, a little bit longer just for coordination, 6 weeks to complete the muscle getting back to 95% throughout your body and your coordination and flexibility. So 6 weeks, we have a formal program where we work with a trainer almost every day. We take weekends off after a couple weeks, but yeah.
How does the reality of space travel compare to your training? You go through all this training to get there, and once you get there, is there something, an event or some experience where you think they did not prepare me for this, they could not have prepared me for this because there's no way to train for this?
Yeah, no, our training is pretty good, but you cannot be fully prepared for the actual experience. But the training does a good job so that you can operate in the actual environment safely and effectively. Probably the hardest thing we do, as I mentioned earlier, physically and mentally, is spacewalks, and we do the training for a spacewalk in a swimming pool. It's a very large pool where we have a full-scale mock-up of the space station on the bottom of the pool. It's 40 feet deep, 200 feet long, and 100 feet wide. And we go down in it looks like a spacesuit, just doesn't have all the systems that a real spacesuit has, but it's a real suit, just on an umbilical, and we have divers that help get us to the bottom of the pool, and they, what we call, weigh us out. They'll add lead or foam in different parts of the suit. There's pockets on the suit so that we're neutrally buoyant, so we neither sink nor float. And it simulates the weightless environment very well. And we'll do 6-hour training sessions in the bottom of the pool in that environment to train for a spacewalk. And the targeted average training ratio is 7 hours in the water for every hour doing a real spacewalk. And it's very effective training. When I got back from my first flight, people asked me how was the training compared to the real thing, and I said it was almost the same, except the view was a lot better in the real thing.
You said the space station's about 5,000 square feet.
In volume on the it's the volume on the inside, the pressurized.
Oh, okay. Not square footage of like livable surface.
No, if you imagine a 5,000 square foot house with 8-foot ceilings, that's got a volume to it. That's the equivalent volume to what we have in the space station.
Okay.
Now. Yeah.
So this room, for perspective, is 5,600 square feet, including the stage. So you're 7 people in an area, a livable, movable area that's, I don't know, 90% of the size of this room.
Yeah,
with an 8-foot ceiling.
The volume of the rooms. So,
Yeah.
and they're much smaller, rooms than here. This is one big volume. So we're in multiple volumes. But it's very roomy, very stretched out. You can go most of a day and maybe not see all of your crewmates because they're at the other end and down around a corner and buried in another module.
All right, I'm gonna tell a story, and I want you to tell me how accurate this story is. NASA sends 2 astronauts up to the space station. Something goes wrong. There's a glitch. Now they're stranded there. NASA's panicking. They don't know what to do. Boeing has no answers. Elon Musk steps up to save the day. But the Biden administration won't let him rescue these 2 astronauts because it would be a political win for the Trump administration. They're in the middle of an election season, and Elon Musk and Trump are best friends till 10 minutes ago. And so Biden didn't want to give Trump the political win and show his incompetence. So he let those poor astronauts sit up on the space station for all of those 9 months with nobody to rescue them. It was very bleak until Trump got elected. Elon, in a matter of a couple weeks, outfitted a device, went up there, rescued those 2 guys, saved the day. Is that true or false?
Yeah, I heard that story.
You've heard this one?
So let me tell you the real story. I mean, there was a little political gain that I would kind of agree with. Take advantage of the political gain, I guess. I was not a fan of the Biden administration, so. But that's on the side. So this was a story of years ago. We gave contracts to 2 companies to develop a spacecraft to deliver crews to the space station and return them to Earth. And this was after the space shuttle was retired. and it goes back to the Bush administration. And those contracts were given to Boeing and to SpaceX. And along with the crewed vehicle in the contract, even prior to that was SpaceX that was to develop a cargo vehicle, unmanned cargo vehicle, which they did. It took longer than originally targeted, but they did that. And in my last flight in 2016, I received 2 of those Dragon cargo vehicles. They performed very well. But in the meantime, they're developing a crewed vehicle, SpaceX Dragon, which we know it flies now. It was about 3 years late from its original schedule, but it had a manned test flight in June of 2000 during the COVID period, and it was very successful. And after that, they started launching once every 6 months to deliver a crew of 4 to join the space station crew every 6 months. And that's gone well. In parallel with that, Boeing was developing the Starliner, and they also had significant developmental challenges along the way, just like SpaceX, but they were neck and neck for a long time. But when Boeing flew their first unmanned test flight, there were some significant issues that needed some work, significant work, more than SpaceX. So they basically went back to the drawing board, addressed those issues. They were bad enough where NASA and Boeing agreed, but NASA pushed, you got to redo that unmanned test flight before we're willing to step up to a crewed test flight. So, and I don't remember the timeline, but it took a couple years to get to a second unmanned test flight. Still had some issues. And then in the development on the ground, working with Barry and Sonny and other astronauts before that, they identified even more issues with the Boeing Starliner. Now, about that time in the program, I had not only moved to Washington, I was working remotely for NASA, but then I retired. I retired a year and a half ago from NASA after working for a couple of years remotely in Washington. So I was no longer directly involved. I didn't have the direct day-to-day conversations after that. But they got to a point where NASA agreed for the test flight, which they launched in June a year ago. And the launch went fine. And then they initiated the rendezvous sequence to the space station. And towards the end, they had lots of problems with it, which they almost did not dock to the space station. And I spent a couple hours talking to Barry Wilmore a few months ago in his home in Houston, and they were, well, all I'll say is they had some thruster issues, and it almost prevented a successful docking. And had they not docked, it was even in question whether they would safely be able to return to Earth. But in the end, they were able to dock. They recovered enough to dock. But because of those problems, now the crew is safe on space station. They were not stranded there, per se. They joined a crew of 7, by the way. The media made it sound like they were the only ones in space and they were stranded there. They joined a crew of 7 other astronauts from at least 4 different countries who were there on the space station in normal sequence of rotation. Every crew member generally stays there for 6 months, and then 3 on a Russian Soyuz and 4 on a SpaceX. So they joined those 7. And NASA and Boeing collectively agreed that we have to work on this, do an engineering analysis to try to figure out what happened and to determine whether it would be safe for the crew to return to Earth on that test vehicle. So we're going to extend them up there. Instead of staying there, whatever it was, a week or 10 days, we're going to extend them till we do the analysis. That lasted from early June until into August, as I recall. When they finally made the decision, then it was NASA's conclusion, we are not comfortable putting the crew back on that test vehicle to return to Earth. So we're not going to support that. Boeing, I think, was advocating putting the crew on there. They were trying to argue that it was safe. NASA said no, and they decided to leave them on there. Boeing undocked that spacecraft unmanned, and they did successfully get it back to Earth. And I have no insight into any kind of issues they had getting it back to Earth. But that decision was made, and it's a normal process that we go through at NASA. We run into challenges at varying levels of degree and intensity every day, and it's just what we do. We have a problem. Okay, what are the options? We do all the analysis to find the best course of action and take that action. It's continuous risk identification and mitigation, and trying to operate with a mitigated risk. So they're on orbit now. They didn't have a way back. So what are their choices? Well, hypothetically, one choice would be to improvise some way that two of them, those two, could get and join a crew of 4 on the existing docked SpaceX vehicle. But they don't have 6 seats on it. There's 4 seats on it. So there would be, theoretically some way maybe to put some foam together and straps and improvise and get them in there. But it wouldn't be very safe. Not a good choice. So that was, evidently I wasn't involved, but it was ruled out. What's the other option? Well, theoretically, and I don't know what their circumstances were, but theoretically, SpaceX could accelerate the readiness of a rocket and a spacecraft, launch it early as a rescue mission to go get them, and then they would have that vehicle to come home on. That's a viable option, and I'm sure it was talked about and evaluated. I don't think the White House had didn't even care about it, had no say in it. But I'm sure it was an option that was evaluated. Again, I don't know the details, so I don't know the pros and cons of that. But what happened was what I had predicted, kind of just knowing from experience what would likely be the outcome. And that is, again, we're rotating nominally. The normal traffic pattern on space station is every 6 months, rotate a Russian Soyuz. Crew comes home, another crew arrives, or vice versa. Crew arrives, and then the replacement crew comes home. The same thing happens with SpaceX. So there was always planned to launch a SpaceX with another crew of 4 in the end of September, early October of last fall. That was always in the plan. So let's just go. The option was, let's just go with the normal schedule and do the SpaceX rotation in the fall. But instead of launching a crew of 4, we'll take 2 crew members off that crew, launch it with a crew of 2 and 2 empty seats, and those 2 empty seats become Sonny and Barry's seats to come home. But there's no urgency to bring them home. We've had people in space routinely for 6 months, occasionally for 9 or 10 months, and even over a year. So there's nothing urgent to get them home. They're already integrated on the space station crew. They're doing space station normal operations. Last fall they even did a spacewalk that was completely unplanned when they launched. But NASA gave them the opportunity. Okay, go do a spacewalk since you're there. So that SpaceX arrived. Again, I forget if it was September or October. But every spacecraft that launches has an expected operational lifetime on orbit of 6 months. So you got to wait till it's coming home in the normal traffic pattern. And that was this last March. So they ended up being there roughly 9 months, a little longer. But the media paid a lot of attention to the whole time, primarily because it was Boeing. And the media has been hammering Boeing ever since the 737 MAX crashes several years ago, then the subsequent grounding of that aircraft because of some technical issues, and then working through the process and getting it flying again. And Boeing had some other things that drew the media's attention, so the media was naturally drawn to this problem because it was Boeing. A very similar thing happened several years ago with a Russian Soyuz, where there was a major failure in a thermal protection system a thermal system of the Soyuz while it was docked. It had a leak. It was be like your car radiator springing a leak, and you got all the antifreeze in the driveway. You're not going to drive the car because it's not going to go very far. You'll ruin the engine. Well, it was concluded that the Soyuz was unsafe for a crew to return to Earth. So the crew was stuck on orbit until the Russians accelerated the preparation for the next spacecraft, launched it without a crew, docked automatically, successfully. That became their replacement vehicle. They had undocked the one that had the failure in it and returned it to Earth without a crew. But now you have a new Soyuz spacecraft docked. It's got a 6-month lifetime. So, oh, by the way, crew, you're going to stay for another 6 months. So they stayed on orbit for a little over a year because of that. 1 American and 2 Russians. The media didn't pay any attention to it at all. So I don't think the White House weighed in with Biden, and it wasn't really a SpaceX rescue mission. It was the normal sequence of things.
Is colonizing other planets feasible?
No.
Mars?
No.
No?
Not colonizing. Going there and exploring is feasible, yes. But you have to take everything you need to support the life of a crew from Earth. And if you're going to stay there a while, you have to resupply everything you need to support life from Earth. Earth is uniquely created for our habitation, says Isaiah in the scripture. Mars is not. It's not habitable. Earth is habitable. So colonizing, the idea of colonizing, which implies, oh, one day we might destroy Earth, or Earth goes away and we need another planet to live on and for the next generations, and so let's go colonize Mars. That's foolishness.
What are your thoughts on SpaceX and Blue Origin? And about Blue Origin, does the fact that Katy Perry has been to space make you feel like your accomplishments aren't really all that much?
I don't even know who Katy Perry is.
She didn't train with you at NASA?
No.
What are your thoughts on SpaceX and Blue Origin?
SpaceX, I'll start there. They've done very well. They only exist as a company because they got contracts from NASA and later the Air Force. It was a policy initiated in the Bush administration to commercialize space, using that word. And for the government, so the government was motivated by policy to do whatever it could to seed the commercialization of space. And you could go back in history and see similar kinds of things happen in aviation. You know, the initial development of aircraft was funded primarily by the government. NASA, before it was NASA, it was NACA, N-A-C-A. And that was a government agency to facilitate the research to support propulsion systems and aeronautics for aircraft. But eventually there was a policy to commercialize it, and now we just take it for granted, commercial aviation. In lots of different ways, civil aviation. It's all companies, right? Building aircraft and selling aircraft, or you're providing services to get us from point A to point B. So it'll be different in space, but there was a motivation to commercialize space. So with SpaceX, we needed a replacement for the space shuttle just to deliver crew members, not big cargo, not to build another space station, but to deliver crew members to the space station. So instead of contracting with a company to design and build a spacecraft to deliver it to the government that we operate like we had done previously, we put out a contract for a company to design and build a spacecraft to our specifications, and we would participate in certifying it as safe for flight. But then you operate it, company, and you just provide the service to the government. So that's in a nutshell the structure of the contract with SpaceX and Boeing. So it's just a different way to procure the same thing in the end. It's a complete misnomer when the media says, "Oh, NASA can't do it." You know, a company like SpaceX does what NASA fails to do or whatnot. No, NASA has been, at least in the human space operations, which is the part of NASA I've been involved in, there's been no better effective organization I've ever been exposed to than that. Those folks, they know what they're doing. Everybody is driven by the mission. And regardless of what the media is saying, they stay focused and they just do the business. It's day to day. And right now, like I said, for with the space station. It's been ongoing every day, 24/7, 365 a day, in an international partnership since 1998, and with a crew since 2000. So it's not success and failure or whatnot, but the SpaceX has done a good job to fulfill what we contracted with them, and they continue to do a good job. And they're doing some amazing technological developments, with the return of boosters. Mm-hmm. Their philosophy was a little different than NASA's in that they proudly accepted failures and learned from them, which is actually a good perspective to a point. When NASA historically had a failure, it was, okay, we got to stop and we got to prevent another failure. SpaceX was, we learned it was successful even though it failed. You hear that all the time, even when their boosters blow up, at the end of the first stage. But we're going to learn from it. It's a philosophical approach, which is good to a point. What we worked really hard with SpaceX, though, to make sure that philosophy didn't migrate into the phase when we were actually putting a crew in a vehicle. Then we don't want to accept a failure, which, we worked through that, and it was a little bit of puts and takes and a little bit of arguing and fist fighting, but it all came out well.
Blue Origin?
Blue Origin's, that's a different, completely different. It's suborbital, so it's going loft in a trajectory, come back in the same place.
How far different between where the space station orbits and where Blue Origin reaches?
Well, we're at 250 miles. I can't remember. I haven't paid that close attention. I don't remember the number they go to, but it's probably no more than, it's less than 100 miles, I think. Anybody know? 60 miles? Yeah. So they go up and they loft. So they're out of the atmosphere because they're lofting when the engine cuts off, and now they're kind of in free fall. They go up and come down. You're feeling weightlessness that entire time until the descent, the entry starts, and then later the motor starts again to slow down. It's a short flight, suborbital. It's a different. You're along for the ride. There's not a lot to be done.
I'm doing experiments. Do you think that we will set foot on Mars in your lifetime?
No.
So Elon Musk's goal is 2035, is it? I think. Anybody know?
Well, Wernher von Braun's goal was 1985 in about 1970 or so. No, I don't think so, because there's some technology that has to happen. But the bigger challenge will always be there. I don't think it'll happen in our lifetime. That'll be getting the political will to do it. And not only to initiate the process, but to sustain the process over the years it would take to actually do it. The political will means you say, okay, we're going to go do this, and then you appropriate the funds to pay for the process along the way. I know we're going over, well, we're getting close to time.
We got a few minutes, yeah.
I give talks sometimes on the geopolitics of spaceflight. We would not be flying in space if it was just to go to space. The political will has never been strong enough to want to initiate a program and then take it through to its completion in and of itself. There's two illustrations I use to make the point. One is the Apollo moon landings, which did occur, and the other one is the space station program. In both cases, there were bigger geopolitical factors that kind of drove the motivation to do them. With the moon landing, it was a matter of national pride in the context of the Cold War with our arch enemy not too long after World War II. And if you study the history of the end of World War II in Europe and the negotiations or non-negotiations with Stalin, between Stalin, Churchill, and Truman, and then the Cold War, which we were a big part of. We lived in West Germany for 3 years, where the Soviet Union was the enemy. And you look at all of that, and then the space race to not send people to space primarily, but to be able to deliver nuclear warheads halfway around the world, as I said before. big geopolitical issues. So that's what motivated the moon race. When we won the race and landed on the moon, actually 2 years prior to that, you can go back and look at the budget dedicated to the Apollo program. It peaked out in 1967, 2 years before the landing, with the anticipation of winning the race and making the landing on the moon. And then it was canceled in 72 after executing the landing 6 times with 3 other rockets and spacecraft ready to go. Just canceled it. So the political motivation was the geopolitical race. In the case of the space station, President Reagan announced Space Station Freedom in 1984 after the space shuttle had been flying for 3 years, which was the space shuttle's primary purpose, to put up a space station. And went through the 80s. Of course, the Challenger accident happened in 86. In the meantime, Space Station Freedom was being designed. 3 times Congress sent NASA back to the drawing board with Freedom. They wouldn't support it. Too expensive, doesn't do enough, it would take too long, too hard, whatever the reasons were. NASA could not get Congress to support Space Station Freedom. But then the Soviet Union fell apart. The wall came down. And we had this new Russia. And there was a lot of motivation to engage with this new Russia because the biggest concern at the time was all their nuclear weapon systems and chemical weapon systems going to places like Iraq, Iran, North Korea, to the bad guys. So we were looking for all kinds of ways to engage with this new Russia and maybe make a democracy in our image, which is always a kind of a fallacy. Anyway, we've proven that over and over again. But the engagement was driven by that, the non-proliferation of weapon systems. And some senior folks from NASA got together with some senior folks of what is now Roscosmos, or the Russian equivalent, their space program. They had Mir flying. They had a crew still flying on the Mir space station when the Soviet Union fell apart. So we'd already been kind of communicating with them. They got together in some famous meetings within NASA anyway, in Crystal City in 1992, I think it was, to wrestle with a technical solution where we could make the proposal to integrate what was Space Station Freedom with Mir 2, the next would have been Soviet space station. They came up with a proposal, presented that to the administration, and in 1993, I think it was, now we're in the Clinton administration, it had been worked under Bush. They initiated, formalized a partnership and called it the International Space Station. Not with a primary motivation to send people to space, but to engage with Russia for non-proliferation reasons. And they designed it so that we could not build a space station without Russia, or operate it now without Russia, as I said before, or they couldn't do it without us. So we're chained at the hip for the life of the space station. But those 2 illustrations tell me that you got to have the political will, and space flight in itself is not going to build and sustain the political will to do it. Now you try to imagine in your mind, what circumstances would build the political will to go to Mars, which is much bigger in scope, much harder, it will take much longer, very expensive. I just don't see it happening.
What if it's an entirely privately funded private enterprise, like a SpaceX, that maybe has contracts with NASA? They're developing the technology. Elon wants to do it, but it's not doesn't require Congress. It just launches.
Sure, it'll still take a lot of resources. Even guys like that don't have that much resource. Yeah. Now he is working on technology, but this big rocket that we see test flights of periodically, his primary purpose is to deliver. They're not talking about it too much in the media, and frankly, I'm not engaged any longer. I haven't been actively trying to keep up, but its original purpose was to deliver a lunar lander to go back to the moon. And there's an active program being developed to go back to the moon. It's
go back to the moon or go to the moon?
Go back to the moon. Yeah. By the way, you can go out there and you can see video or imagery from a lunar orbiter that's been in orbit a long time, and you can see all of those lunar landers on the surface of the moon where they operated from.
Let's go back. Let's say we go back 20 years. So you're 20 years younger. Let's just do this. Let's put you 20 years younger today. We have the technology to get to Mars. Problems have been solved, and they call you up. Elon calls you up and says, "We want to start training you for a Mars mission." Would you go to Mars?
We've had this conversation my whole career at NASA. She was 100% supportive of me going to the moon, and I thought I might have a shot at going back to the moon. We going back to the moon, but me going back for the first time.
Yeah,
obviously, I was a kid the first time we did it, but I really wanted to go to the moon. As a matter of fact, I was one day away from being assigned to the test flight of the Orion spacecraft, which would go back to the moon in 2007 under the Constellation program, which was initiated under Bush, but it was canceled a year later. I'm so thankful I did not get that assignment because it would have wasted so much time. Instead, I got sent back to Russia for another flight to the space station. But we talked about that. So she was very supportive of me going to the moon if I got the opportunity, but never to Mars. And frankly, I was not interested in going to Mars. I said earlier that the biggest attraction in space is the Earth. It's incredibly beautiful. And the more you study it, the more you see. Even the moonwalkers, or the guys that didn't walk on the moon but went there, the command module pilot, the three of them, if you talk to any of them, they'd say the most fascinating part of it, but certainly it was cool to be on the moon, 1/6 gravity and jumping around and all that and doing that. And Charlie talks about that. He talks about falling down. Talks about, I got to take an aside here. Talks about falling down, tripping and falling down because he got a little too cocky and fell down. And he did a couple of push-ups in his big spacesuit, but with 1/6 gravity, he did it like 1, 2, and then pushed really hard and stood up on his feet from a push-up. So you can't do that anywhere but the moon. But still, they would say that the fascination was with the Earth. So now we leave Earth orbit and get in a trajectory to go to Mars. Pretty soon, the Earth is a dot in the sky at best. You don't see any stars because the sun is in view the whole time. There's nothing. You don't see stars. Get the flat earthers saying, well, it's all fake because you don't see stars in the pictures. Well, we can go out in the daytime, and granted, we're looking through the atmosphere. The atmosphere looks blue from the surface of the Earth, but we don't see stars during the day here either, right? We don't see stars up there because the sun is so bright that it just blanks out all other light sources, with the exception of the moon, if you had a full moon. And on the way to Mars, there's nothing to block the sun. So you're not even going to see stars. So it'd be a pretty boring trip. It's not going to be big either, so you're not going to have a whole lot of entertainment or things to do. So not to mention the length of time to get there, length of time to get back. I just never had any desire. Longer answer than what you expected. But, yeah.
So if that's out of the scope, then looking forward, what major ambitious achievement in the space program would you like to see in your lifetime? What would you like to see us accomplish?
I would like to see this fulfilled, or what's currently going on, to go back to the moon and to do more exploration there. Is there a driving reason that I can pinpoint, objective reason? No. But it's already in work, in development. It'll be a long-term vision. Does it have some risk? Yes, it does have some risk because it's spread out over such a long time. I question whether we'd be able to sustain the political will to do it. But I don't have any I'm not going to say, there's going to be great benefits to going and exploring the moon. I look at it more philosophically, and I'll talk a little bit about this maybe more tomorrow. We bear the image of the Creator. And right there in Genesis 1, he relinquishes his creation as co-regents to subdue his creation and have dominion over all things, right? I'll say it tomorrow. Scientific endeavor is a component of subduing, of that commission, of that dominion mandate given in Genesis 1. And space exploration is just one aspect of that endeavor. Humanity, bearing the image of the Creator and given that commission, we have a curiosity that's unique. We want to search out what we don't know yet. We want to explore. That's the history of human civilization. And space flight is just one aspect of that that's ongoing now. What we'll find, what we'll discover, the outcome, I don't know what it'll be. But it's inherent to being human.
What question do you wish you were asked in a Q&A like this that you've never been asked? That you wish you were?
Gosh, I don't know. I can't think of I sometimes challenge people that you can't ask me a question I've never heard before. I don't do that anymore because one young man did one time.
All right.
I can't think of one.
Okay. Are you active on social media?
No.
Nobody can follow you anywhere?
Oh, you can follow me. I got a lot of followers, I think, on Facebook and Twitter or X and Instagram. I was active during the last flight because I was posting pictures and whatnot. But shortly after landing, I just got off it. It's not a priority for me. I don't want to. It's a time sink. I might see if there's anything going on of interest there once in a while, but there's not much. So
that is our time.
Thank you for listening to the latest podcast from Kootenai Church. If you'd like to learn more about Kootenai Church or to donate to our church ministry, you can do so online by visiting kootenaichurch.org. We hope you enjoyed this podcast and pray you'll join us again next time. Once again, thank you for listening.